the huge array of Latino organizations and so forth. That has done an incredible, that has had an incredible impact. And the Fremont bill that was in that hearing was stopped in its tracks because the mayor of the town, partly again, I don't know how else to say, intimidated by this huge crowd of brown faces, very eloquently testifying, along with their supporters, casted the deciding vote. You know, mayors are not always allowed to vote unless they are going to cast the deciding vote, and it was like, you know, it was like in the movies, everybody in this tension, we went away, and then they came back, and there it was, the bill failed. But Senator Jansen and others, who's now a senator in Nebraska legislature, led a campaign to put the vote, put the ordinance to a vote, to a public vote. And it went to the courts and so forth, but eventually was a referendum that went to the vote, and they won that way. The majority of these jittery Fremont residents voted for this anti-immigrant ordinance. But ACLU and MOLDEF are now took it to court, and it's hung up in federal court, and it's probably going to fizzle away in the end. So those are the good news. Thank you.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions before the next set of panels begin. So the next panel actually is going to be right next door in the little theater. Oh no, it's in the voice. No, I'm sorry. And then there's anyhow. Yeah, let's take questions.
I identify myself as a political economist as well.
As to what, I'm sorry?
I identify myself as a political economist as well. So my question is, you know, you referred to Stiglitz a lot. Now Stiglitz is increasingly turning around to Harvey's analysis of neoliberal globalization as fundamentally being a class problem. Although they come from different perspectives and from different traditions. Now, I want to pitch that understanding against the context of the fact that Carlos Slim Helú is the richest man in the world right now, as are many Mexicans who are among the poorest as well. So one of the key things that is actually forgotten in a lot of these immigrant debates is a question of class, because a lot of it is framed in terms of ethnicity and all these different aspects of I guess predetermined affiliation. Now, that brings me to the question about whether you have considered the question of class when it comes to immigrants, particularly Latino immigrants in the U.S. itself at a national level. Because when we do the global political economy analysis, we're going to go navigate not just the local and global, but also the regional and the national as well. And because a lot of policy formulations and all that stuff happens at these multiple levels. So class, I think, becomes a really determining factor in that. I just wanted your thoughts on the class divisions among the umbrella Latino, umbrella term Latinos.
Within the Latino population itself.
Yeah, and how does that really play out in this debate?
Well, I should tell you that I also often call myself a political economist. That's how I was trained, sociologist. So, although I think I never excel. I mean, I always have this trouble still connected, but it is my preferred lens. And clearly, what you see in terms of my analysis regarding wealth concentration and all that, it's a class analysis, is what we're talking about. And they are class projects. Now, it's funny that you ask about the internal class divisions of Latin American immigrants. Because I am originally from Venezuela. And Venezuelans, are you Venezuelan?
No.
No.
No, just my fault. You know.
Okay, your antennas went way up.
Yeah,
and Venezuelans represent in the U.S. are representative of a very different type of migration. It's smaller, it's newer, and it's primarily right now professional and high skilled. So, and that is the case with others, primarily South American immigrants. Although again, sometimes they're very bipolar. Colombians, for example, are also highly represented among the highly skilled and college educated, but you also see segments of Colombians that are the lower levels, and the same with Peruvians and so forth. However, even depending on the place, I think, I'm going to attempt to answer it this way because it's a long conversation. But needless to say, I'm thinking a lot about this because in Nebraska, for example, you see many of these immigrants converging, but they're really the minority. The majority are Mexicans and Central Americans and so forth. And so many of the immigrants from South America who are arriving in Nebraska, and I tell you this because I've done a little bit of work on this, and many of these immigrants have no choice often but to rely on the existing co-ethnic community themselves in order to be able to make up for their own challenges, lack of language, sometimes precarious labor status, because the fact that they're skilled doesn't mean that they also don't work on the precarious. And like I suggested, they're often underemployed or subemployed or unemployed altogether. They face all kinds of their own challenges. So one of the papers that I wrote, and I'm still working on that area, is what happens later, because history tells us that as these better equipped, very resource immigrants, manage to find their footage, they will, essentially move up, and everybody else stays where they were. Or, there's always a little bit of movement, but those human capital resources count for a lot. But more importantly to me is the political question. What will happen to Latino politics? Once more and more of these newer, higher skilled, higher educated immigrants are coming from places like, Venezuela, leaving Chavez and all of that. What is going to happen to Latino politics? Are they going to vote Republican, for example, more likely than Democrat?
You see that a lot in Florida, Miami, for example.
Yeah. So, my next project, I'm going on sabbatical next year, I was about to tell you that. My project is working on, it's taking me a while to get finally the time and the mental disposition to plunge with my 2 feet in this Venezuelan migration project. But I think it's important to do it, and that is one of the questions that I'm going to do. So I think that's part of what we need to interrogate. But the good news is, again, well, that we know from history, from studies even of multi-generational Mexicans, that being immigrant and being a Latin American immigrant that always is at the verge of being thrown into the undeserving side of the equation has done a lot for creating pan-Latino ethnicity identities and so forth. So what I see in Nebraska is, this Latino organization that I show you called OLAS, so OLAS, that organization is full of South Americans and so forth that I don't think would have given the grassroots community the light of day years ago. These were the Colombians that I interviewed at the beginning of this other project, and who would confess to me saying, oh, I used to see these people working in the cleaning companies, and I said, I would never, And obviously they soon learned that they're as vulnerable as anybody else. So that there are opportunities for solidarity, but there is work to be done here. I don't know, that's a long answer to your question that may not have answered it, but.
Thank you.
Yes, oops. I think there is one over there.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a comment or a question. Your picture back with the hard hats, the Latinos working on construction, you don't see that in Minnesota.
No?
Maybe in St. Paul, you
Oh,
don't see
really?
that in Minnesota. And I wonder what's going on there. It's maybe a research question. Whether in Nebraska they are not unionized
I mean,
because
they don't wear hats when they're not.
no.
They're not.
You do not see Latinos working in construction.
These are not unionized Latino workers.
That's what's happening.
Absolutely not.
Because in Minnesota, very unionized across the
Ah.
board, all those construction workers would be white. That's just the way it
That
is,
is
yeah.
fascinating.
That's-
Yeah.
In Minnesota, I think when it comes to construction being funded by the government, yes, very white. But then, in my experience, in my organization, you see a lot of subcontract Latinos doing the work.
Right.
Which a lot of the times are not only it's all Latino crew, but they're being paying cash. There's no benefits at all. There's
Right.
Right.
I mean,
Subcontracting.
it's a ghost economy almost.
But not that public.
Not like that.
It's very interesting, but here in Sherburne County, we have a lot of people from Bosnia, and they work in construction, roofers, Cherokees, how they call
Sure.
Cherokee, all these workers, and Latinos, and sometimes you have to get it. How they communicate is a mystery. None of them speak English.
Well, that's part of the de-skilling of the labor processes.
Correct.
Language is no longer important. Yeah, maybe see, there are lots of, this is great.
I wanted to follow up on the question over here in the interest of having holistic explanations that you mentioned this morning. How about the interests of wealthy white Americans, particularly those who are industrious and in the financial sector? In other words, a lot of them should be in favor of comprehensive immigration reform. But they seem to have contradictory class interests. How would you characterize it?
Well,
Or this could be even smaller owners of firms.
right. I mean, they want labor, especially in these labor-strapped states. And ultimately, they don't care how they get it. So their whole point is about, lowering labor costs and getting the labor that they need. And that's why they're primarily supporter of guest workers programs. They want them now, they want it flexible, they don't want to, part of why we don't pass immigration reform is, why should we? If those who are being the most influential in public policies today, and who are, I just saw, in our buying, as Stiglitz himself is, our buying political access, are those who are doing fine, thank you very much, with flexible labor forces, with unprotected subcontractors, and so on and so forth.
Well, and to add to your response to that question, I also wanted to point out that, I think there's a difference between business owning classes that actually own and run high skill demanding industries,
Yeah.
and not so, particularly in the context of what you call de-skilling of labor, the not so high skill demanding segment. And for them, for the latter, it's always good to have a really made docile labor force available so that they can actually be then exploited more in terms of.
When you see this segmentation, but I wanna, the economist,